Good morning, everyone. How are you? Welcome to Refresh. You know what this time is. It's a time to connect, be inspired, learn something, and ultimately feel a bit better for this time we've got to spend together. And as you know, that's what Generation W is all about. Funny, I remember last week I came on and said, can you believe that next week is Thanksgiving already? And then I'm thinking, hello, can you believe that Thanksgiving is tomorrow already? How did that happen? I guess we're as ready as we're going to be, understanding full well at this point that the holiday will be different for many. That COVID has proven challenging to so many rituals and traditions, that's a given by now. I keep thinking about this and the relationship between change and resilience. We have been forced to look at the world differently. I don't know if that's all bad. Actually, I think there's pretty much good in that. I know it feels painful, and we have to continue to show that we have this remarkable ability to adapt and to evolve, and we have. I think that's where the resilience comes in. I reflected recently and wrote that I find myself better prepared to embrace Thanksgiving's most important calling this year, to give thanks. Why this year more than any other? Well, 11 months into what feels like a cursed 2020, it has actually instilled in me more than a fleeting, occasional feeling of thankfulness, but rather a regular practice of gratitude. It has become my go-to, something within my control. Every day that I have come to rely on as times that I know we're sharing, times that I know have grown increasingly more challenging, or as our friend Lisa Shallot would say, more curveballs being thrown at us. I'm happy to say that this discipline of gratitude has become a regular dose that Refresh has really helped me find. This antidote, this little sunshine piece that we all can do. Because we need to find a silver lining to appreciate the goodness that surrounds us in a big and especially small ways. And I have to say that, it's choppy water, but again, we have shown that we can evolve and adapt. We can do this. And that our connecting actually gives us that additional little pop of superpower. And so what I've learned among so many things in the age of COVID is that gratitude is truly a well-seasoned recipe for well-being. We've had many of our fantastic guests mention gratitude, and we've called out some of those in our newsletter. And if you don't get our newsletter, please, if you will, sign up and you can get it. But I thought today, as we go through today, and we are so grateful for Dr. Marci, but why don't you add your little moment of gratitude and share it with all of us, because we know all of us, that lifts us all. And I am sure that Dr. Marci will be adding his little dose of gratitude today as well. As we continually try to remain vigilant about our health both physically and mentally, it's good to lean on each other. It really is. And speaking of mental health in particular, today we truly have a uniquely versed physician, neuroscientist, author, and entrepreneur. He has started several tech innovation companies. He's currently the Chief Psychiatrist and Chair of the Ready Clinical Council, and we're going to learn more about that, and a part-time Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. His research interests include the physiology and neurobiology of emotion and empathy, and we've talked a lot about empathy in these recent months. Academically, his goals are to quantify the relationship between the use of mobile media, communication devices, and communication devices in the digital age. So essentially, what is social media doing to our brains? Why are we experiencing such emotional disconnect in the time of COVID? And what about the service model? How do we make care more accessible and affordable, especially mental health services, at a time when demand has reached unprecedented levels? Service, right? We're being overwhelmed by the need for mental health professionals. Well, this is the day before Thanksgiving, and we are grateful to Dr. Carl Marci, and may I add, Kelly Wallace at Trail Runners, who has introduced us to the fantastic Dr. Carl. And he'll share with us today an abundance of knowledge and research and helpful hints about our brains and about mental health. I know that, any day is a good day, but especially today is a great day. So welcome, Dr. Carl. So glad you're here.
Donna, thanks to you and to your audience for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, I am too, considering that I just have to ask the questions and you have, and remember what I said, an abundance of knowledge. right? So this is going to be great.
I'll try. Yeah,
All
sure.
right, so listen, you have accomplished so much, and generally when we have guests who are so accomplished, we can't fill in everything they've done, but you have this wealth of experience. What are you most proud of? Where do you like to spend most of your time?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. I have a short attention span, so I get bored easily. So I like to move on from one thing to the other. But I think the thing I'm most proud of is that I was fortunate enough to want to go to medical school at a fairly young age. Was able to stay on a path, and then fell in love with the brain. And when I was in medical school, the first textbooks were coming out with these beautiful pictures from what we now know as functional magnetic resonance imaging and PET scanning. So we were able to see pictures of a healthy human brain for the first time without having to do surgery or look to animals to understand things. And so it was a very exciting time in neuroscience. And so when you're in medical school and you fall in love with the brain, you sort of have three paths. You can either be a neurosurgeon, a neurologist, or a psychiatrist. And neurosurgeons are wonderful, and they do a lot of surgery. They don't talk to people. I like talking to people, so rule that out. Neurologists are terrific at diagnosing things they can see, but it was pretty obvious to me there was lots of things going on in the brain that we couldn't see. So I went into psychiatry, and I have enjoyed that journey because it really is about not just the human psyche, the mind, but now that we have all this brain science, we can connect it to this organ of interest, which I'm happy to talk more about if you like.
Of course we will. Tell us absolutely. We are here to learn. So tell us
Yeah.
a bit about the brain.
Well, the human brain's got 80 billion neurons, each one making between 10 and 20,000 connections. It's thought to be one of the most complex entities in the known universe. And what's really cool is we all have one. And I make very few guarantees in life, but I guarantee that the brain that you and I start this conversation with is not going to be the brain we end with. Why? Because as we're speaking and dialoguing and connecting and sharing information, our brains are directing our attention, tagging bits of information for relevance with our emotion centers, and some of it gets stored in our memory. And if we're really, really successful here, Donna, it might even change some of our behavior in the future, hopefully for the better in a healthy way. And that process I just described of paying attention, tagging something for emotional relevance, laying down a memory track, and then changing one's behavior is really a definition of engagement that I came up with a number of years ago to help connect this ephemeral term that lots of people use, I'm engaged with something, to a brain mechanism. And if you think about it, you can think about attention, emotion, memory, and behavior as silos, or you can think of them as a continuous stream that we're constantly going through. And I think all of our brains are changing in extraordinary ways during this pandemic, which again we can talk more about. But it's really remarkable what we're going through right now.
Well, listen, there's a lot in there. I just want to parse a couple of pieces. The first thing is, why do we believe, and maybe I don't know, we collectively, that we don't have the capacity to change? Why do we hold on, right? If our brain, you presented the brain as a very malleable, growth-oriented organ that after conversations, I can map what I can have behavioral change.
Mm-hmm.
And yet everyone always sounds so stuck. Why is that?
It's a very good question. So I think a couple things. First of all, from a brain perspective, there are really two processes that we now know a lot more about than say 20, 30 years ago. One is neuroplasticity. That is the ability of neurons to connect in different ways. And that's what's happening right now as we're talking about. The second one, which we all need to keep in mind, is neurogenesis, which is the ability to make new neurons in our brain, particularly in areas like the hippocampus where we store memories. And so this is why we always encourage people as they age, if they worry about their memory or dementia or things like that, is to have new experiences. So by having new experiences, we lay down new memory tracks because they're so rich and vital. And so, I sort of talk to people and I say, look, for the rest of our lives, we're going to define the world before COVID and after COVID, because it is such a rich experience that it's going to lay down this deep set of memories that we're all going to have, good and bad. But it will be a defining moment in our brain. The reason why people feel stuck is because we form habits. And we form habits because they are shortcuts, so that we don't have to think about every little thing that we do. So an example might be, riding a bicycle or driving a car for the first time, right? You got to think about, putting the car in gear and where are the lights and turn signals and the brake and the gas. But now you just, after habit, you get in and you go, and you don't think about it twice. So it's a remarkably efficient system, this habit formation in the brain. The problem is, as habits form, they become very, very routine, and they're not so easy to change. But as we're all experiencing now, big events can inspire big change, right? So who among us is not, working differently, relating to our friends and family differently? So we know we are capable of change. It just requires a lot of motivation or a big external event to do it.
So big events create big change.
And small events can create small change, which is why, when you want to sort of change your behavior for the better, let's take exercise, for example.
Yeah, let's
I'm,
do it.
I'm often counseling patients to exercise more. Why? Well, because we know exercise is good for the brain. It's good for our bodies too. But it stimulates, among other things, a chemical called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. And what that does is it makes our neurons, our brain neurons and all our neurons, more malleable, more flexible. And what that does is it stimulates memory and learning. So one of the healthiest things we can do for anxiety and depression and other things is to exercise, but yet lots of people don't do it. Well, the key there is, start small. Like you're not going to get up from being a couch potato and become a marathon runner overnight. Even people who run marathons, right? They have these very disciplined. You got to start slow, right? So I encourage people, look, just get up and stretch a couple times a day. Go for a walk around the block, and then slowly add incrementally 5-10%, and over time you can imagine in 30 days what you can do. And I always I will tell my patients too, as a quick story, is I say, look, in my experience, no one has ever finished an exercise routine and said, wow, that was a waste of time, right? Have you ever done that?
No.
Right?
If you can get to the end of it, Dr. Call, you're deliriously happy.
Yeah,
At the
so
end,
you gotta hold that goal in
totally.
mind, and strive for it, because the sometimes a little bit of pain is worth the gain. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big, actually, I was working out with my sons, and he was like, Mom, pain's worth it. And it's actually, it's kind of nice to have somebody to encourage you to think through the pain and get to the other side, because the results are worth it for sure. Let me do this. Let me say hello to a couple of our friends, if you will. Dr. Carl, you're now your new friends as well. We say to Erin Colwell joins us all the way from, I believe, Seattle. And Carla and Jill Hawkett. Happy birthday, Jill Hawkett. We're gonna have to talk about senior brains for Jill. Jill, just kidding. Jakimpa Martin, of course, we have a lot of people. Hey, Perrin and Rachel and my mother. We do have to talk about senior brains. We really do. And Trisha, love seeing all of you here. And Joy Kurtz and Jeannie Milbauer. Lots of people are joining us from all over the country, which I do love so much. Maggie from Massachusetts, of course. Oh, Erin's in Colorado. Thank you for it. Thank you, Erin. Somebody wants to know, does exercise and eating fire similar neurons in the brain?
Yes and no. So it certainly depends on what you're eating. But we do know that certain foods are trigger the reward centers. Chocolate, for example, has I believe well over 100 different neuroactive elements in it. So chemicals that kind of stimulate different parts of the brain, which is why it feels very rewarding and can be habit forming. High fat foods can also stimulate the reward centers. So sweets and high fat foods are things that used to be hard to find when we were scavengers and hunters and gatherers. Now we live in a world where you can go down the store in your car and buy as much as you want. So we have to be very careful with some of those foods. But from a diet perspective, I think the preponderance of evidence among diets is the Mediterranean diet is probably one of the most studied and successful for brain health and overall health. And so I encourage people to look into that. Exercise is going to get your heart rate up in a way that food doesn't. It's going to stimulate vascular flow, and it's going to have a bunch of different neurohormones that are going to be a little different than food. So that's why I think the two together are so important, right? I encourage people to eat right and exercise. because the combination over time can be very powerful. And that's one of the things that COVID has challenged us for, right? Gyms are closed. We're stuck at home. It's easier to grab a bag of chips than an apple, that kind of thing. So, it's really a time to be vigilant when it comes to our health.
Yeah, well, but we need encouragement to do that. We had a chance to visit a little bit before, and you started to teach me, if you will. See, my brain's already changed since I've talked to you, just in a matter of
Great.
days, one day,
It's
24 hours.
happening. It's
That's it.
happening. See, it's
I'm
happening
telling
now.
you, everybody here is going to become an acolyte. It will be awesome. But you talked about why COVID is so disruptive. Why, in other words, I talked to my doctor the other day. I love her. I just happened to pop in for some extra vitamins. And she says, oh my God, people are going crazy. Talk to another friend. I mean, there is this sense that we're all kind of off our rockers. Why is that? Is it true all the time and we're just seeing it more, or is it escalated to another degree?
Oh, I don't think there's any question it's escalated. I mean, look, to be clear, pre-COVID, there was a growing mental health crisis in this country, right? So over the last decade or two, we have seen high single, low double-digit increases in almost every category of mental illness, whether it's PTSD, anxiety, depression, suicide rates, ADHD. They were all going up, all going in the wrong direction. And then COVID happens, and you add another 10-20% on top of that. And you get statistics like a recent survey by the American Psychological Association. 8 out of 10 Americans surveyed felt high stress, and 6 out of 10 said that they would benefit from seeking out a mental health professional. That is a staggering statistics. And when you look at what is driving that high stress, it's concerns about catching the virus, it's concerns about employment, it's concerns about finances, right? These are the things that really drive an awful lot of anxiety in people. Again, even prior to COVID, but we were at a time when we had low inflation and a rising economy, and now all that is sort of gone sideways. Number one. Number two, we have this situation, although I think there's a little more clarity now that we've had some good news on the vaccine front, where there was extraordinary uncertainty. How long is this going to last? I mean, I remember back in March, talking to friends and reading and experts, and yeah, we're going to have this crash. We flatten the curve. Remember, we're going to flatten the curve. All we had to do is flatten that curve. Well, we never really flattened it very much. And had we, it would have lasted 2 or 3 months. And here we are, 8-9 months into this thing. And it looks like the brain under uncertainty, it really doesn't like certainty. I mean, if you think about the brain, from one lens, its job is to try to anticipate and predict the future so you can navigate your life. And so when you're in an environment when you can't know what the future is going to be because you're in the middle of a 100-year global pandemic, that uncertainty by itself just creates a layer of stress, all in and of itself, independent of other factors. And then you have the strong recommendations, in some places mandates, and others to sort of self-isolate, to wear masks, to wash hands. I mean, these are really big behaviors that we didn't have to do before, and they create anxiety. So I think it's the word I often use to describe our current situation is surreal, right? It's just surreal, right? Like we're acting in ways we never acted before. We're doing it en masse. There's not a part of the world or a human that isn't touched by this in some way. And I can't think of any other event, certainly in my lifetime, that has impacted the entire population. So it's a big deal.
It is a big deal, but you specifically referenced some fundamental, basic evolutionary baseline needs of a brain, and how COVID has ruptured that. In terms of
Sort of, let's talk about that, right? So I think to frame the answer, I often like to remind people. Remember, I started off that human brain's got 80 billion neurons making 10 to 20,000 connections, and it's unique, and it is unique on the planet in terms of other animal species. And one of the consequences of the complexity of our brain is that at birth, our brain is only about 10% developed. That means 90% of brain development occurs outside of the womb, right? And so you think about that, that requires, an attentive adult caregiver, typically a parent, but not always, to really take care of all of our needs early on. And society says on the order of 18 years before you can go off and be independent. That's almost 2 decades, right? So how do we do that? Well, we do that by forming strong social bonds, connections, attachments to other humans. And that does a lot of things. It gives us security. It helps us learn how to regulate our emotions. It gives our brain time to mature so that we can explore on our own. But we never stop connecting with people and having that desire to have a social, typically face-to-face intimate connection. And so part of the driver of a lot of the mental health issues that we're seeing is the disruption in normal social interaction. I think, and I think it was a huge mistake to talk about social distancing, right? That's a disastrous phrase. It should be physical distancing. We should not be socially distancing. We should be spending a lot of time socializing, whether it's by Zoom or 6 feet apart with a mask on. But the social distance, it was a terrible idea.
That is fascinating. All right, we're definitely picking that up and carrying that along. No social distancing, just physical distancing. It's interesting when I think about COVID and all the things that it's revealed, and we're going to talk a little bit about how our brains can get us to dehumanize others and racism, because you talked about that connection. But before we go there, our work at Generation W is a foundational belief in the power of human connection. And that's what we do. And we talk about it before now. It always seemed like a soft skill. And somehow a soft skill isn't important. And what we're learning here is connection is a vital life skill, right? It feeds our brain the nourishment to be able to thrive. And it's so interesting about from a culture and social perspective, even like the use of words, social distancing versus physical distancing. You know what I mean? We don't even think about the impact of those words and how powerful it is.
Yeah, language matters, Donna, and how we describe things is really important. And I think we form some bad habits sometimes around language, and so I think part of what my academic work and the book I'm writing, which hopefully will come out, COVID willing, sometime in the fall. It's called Rewired, and it's caring for your brain when your smartphone won't. And so so this idea that technology really should be in service of us, but typically we're in service of our technology, right? Because of the way lots of these things have developed, which we can talk about.
Yes,
But I think the important point is that we really are wired to connect, and that when we disrupt that connection, we get into trouble, and that the sort of soft skill or soft language of empathy or things like that. Part of what got me into my career was the fact that we had begun to be able to take pictures of the brain, and empathy became a pretty hard science, right? So we now actually understand the networks of neurons in the brain that are involved in empathy, empathy, and theory of mind. How does one mind discriminate between another mind? And that when I watch someone who's in pain, the pain circuits in my brain actually fire a little bit, right? That's how I understand their pain on a personal level.
So
And that's actually pretty cool.
So my brain, our brains, physically pick up someone else's brain, someone else's pain, and our body fires internally. So I actually can feel their pain, and that's empathy.
That's exactly right. And it turns out that the closer that person is to you socially, the stronger that's going to fire, right? So if it's a complete stranger, you might have a little bit of empathy with them. Your brain might fire the pain circuits a little bit. But if it's someone you know or someone you're very close to, it's going to fire even more, which is why the pain of a loved one suffering or a child suffering as a parent is much, much stronger than, say, reading the newspaper about some stranger.
Well, I have to tell you, it gives a lot of credence to a lot of us who are mothers, and many of us may talk to each other or our friends. We always say you're only as happy as your most unhappy child, because you physically can feel their unhappiness, and it impacts your ability to live your life. Let me just add, Joy has asked this question: is it true that our patience is affected by this COVID lockdown? I often feel I have less patience, and I don't like
that. Yes, you could call it patience, you could call it frustration tolerance, you could call it irritability. Yes, these are all things that are impacting us. And let's talk a little bit about why, right? There's a number of different potential causes that aren't mutually exclusive, but one of them is just that uncertainty and the anxiety of being worried about your finances, your social connections, your getting this disease, particularly if you have risk factors, right? So there's that overlay. I think the other overlay is that we're all spending more time doing things we didn't used to do, like sitting in front of a computer on Zoom, or not exercising or eating right, and so that contributes to irritability. People who suffer from mental illness, often irritability is one of the hallmarks. And what's happening in the brain is that an area of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which sits right behind your forehead.
Right.
Think of it as the conductor in the symphony of your brain orchestra. Gets tired when it's overwhelmed, right? We all get a little cranky if we're hungry and we haven't eaten, right? Hangry, or if we haven't slept well. That same mechanism is basically your brain getting tired, needing to recharge its neurotransmitter, needing to refresh. But now it's sort of happening throughout the day. So this is why I think when we get to recommendations, one of them is just self-care, right? You got to take care of yourself.
Yeah, and we talk about that as hard as it is, especially as women, right? I probably should ask you from a gender perspective, what does your work look like? We spent a little time last week about like a female brain to a male brain, but let me just jump to this and we can touch on that. We're disconnected, right? We're talking about social distancing. It should only be physical distancing, but we are experiencing social distancing. How do we form strong social bonds? This is a question from Facebook, in such a disconnected way of life right now. How can we mediate that feeling of disconnectedness? This conversation, by the way, is helping me. I hope it's helping everybody else do that.
Well, I think that's exactly the point, right? I think one of the things I talk about in the book is how do we make technology in service of our needs rather than us, sort of chasing, advertising or compulsion loops, or something that some company in Silicon Valley is trying to sort of trick us into using it more because that's what they're incented and paid on. And I think one of the ways to do that is with forums like this, Donna, right? Where, we're using technology to try to create a forum that has sight and sound, that leverages a conversation that people hopefully can relate to and learn from, and take something away. And that's one example. I think other examples are, the good old telephone, right? Whether it's FaceTime or just calling, someone you haven't talked to in a while to say hi for 10 minutes. I used like to give the example when I used to talk about, arousal, right? So, one of the sensors we used to use a lot of is skin conductance, and it's two little sensors you put on your skin, and it literally measures the electricity from your sympathetic nervous system as you're sort of going day by day. And if you watch these sensors, they kind of go up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, right? And as you do that, you're sort of like, oh, well, what are the things that make us aroused? Well, I used to use examples like it's late at night, you're getting ready to go to sleep, you're sort of winding down, the phone rings, and it's a friend or relative you haven't talked to in a while. It's like, hey, oh, back and forth, back and forth. You hang up that phone, and guess what? You're not that tired anymore. Why?
Right. Why?
Because you've just had a series of engaging moments, right? You're paying attention, you're having an emotional response, you're triggering your memory centers, you're talking, your heart rate's going up, and this is very energizing, and it turns out very healthy for our brains. So whether it's picking up the phone or using Zoom, there are ways of connecting socially that don't require face-to-face interactions. And then on that point, I happen to live in Boston, and I like to exercise. I go for runs outside, and I love watching, little groups 6 feet apart in the park, talking and smiling and interacting. It's like, it's fantastic, right? So there are ways to safely connect with people in this environment, and I encourage people to do that as much as possible.
Okay, so I want to just go back to something you said. You said even before COVID, we were having a rapid growth in mental health issues. COVID has been an accelerator. So, and we're going to talk about some of the things that you're working on to help with that. But let me ask you this. Good question from Kelly here. Can COVID lead to a decline in the stigma around mental health? Because so many people now either are feeling they're mentally challenged. I guess that's a good way to say it. Or they know somebody who's dealing with this. Is it a way perhaps now that, again, the language around being mentally healthy, getting help, seeking support can be more inclusive and encouraging? Because up until now,
Well,
right, it's kind of been like put in the corner, closed in the closet.
yeah, I love this question, right? Because I think one of the opportunities, and I think we should all look for silver linings in this pandemic, right? And I think one of them is the potential to destigmatize mental illness, right? And the way I talk about it is to say, okay, so who among us has not felt some anxiety during this pandemic, right? Who among us has not had a little bit of OCD about washing our hands? Or remember in the beginning, we were washing packages coming in the doors, right? And worried about surfaces, right? Cleaning every surface in the house, right? That starts to look like OCD. Who among us hasn't had some hypervigilant, looking over your shoulder, in the grocery store? Am I far enough away from people, like people with PTSD? Who among us has not had moments of sadness or social isolation that people with depression have? And who among us has not felt moments where reality just feels like it's splitting, like there's just something else going on? And that's the lived experience of someone with schizophrenia, right? So we are all having, like it or not, empathic moments, lived experience of what it's like to have these disorders. And I think that's an opportunity to sort of write and talk and discuss how hard that can be. And that this isn't about character flaws or people being unlucky, right? These are brain disorders that need to be taken very, very seriously, and that we're all vulnerable to, as we are now witnessing. 50% of the population now is saying, 60% of the population saying, I could use help from a mental health professional. Now that leads to a whole separate conversation about access and how we get to care, which we can talk about. But first, recognizing that this is real, it's in the brain. There are treatments, things we can do, is really step one.
Yeah, no, and we do want to talk about treatments, but you told me a great story about the power of connecting, and just talking to somebody and its value versus everybody. There's a lot of pills out there, right? A lot of people looking for medication to solve the problem.
Yeah. So when I entered my residency in adult psychiatry, and I was very privileged at Harvard Medical School to work with some amazing clinicians. But one of them really stood out as a guy named Dr. John Abramson, and he was a primary care doctor in the North Shore of Boston, and I spent a lot of time working with him, and he was like a magician, right? I mean, he would come in, the patients, and I, we would have these lunch conversations, like, what are you doing differently? It's like, well, I just kind of connect with them. It's like, yeah, but what does that mean? He's like, well, it turns out he had studied with shamans in South America, and he liked to read philosophy, and he was a very technically competent doctor, right? I mean, he knew how to treat diabetes and hypertension, but somehow, he got better outcomes, and he was tracking that, and we would talk about how he did that. And it really boiled down to how we connect with the patients. And I kept asking him, well, could we measure that somehow? Right? Because if you could capture that and bottle that, like, wouldn't that be amazing? So fast forward, and I'm now being introduced to psychotherapy as a trainee, as a resident. And I'm starting to look into the science and the research on psychotherapy. Well, it turns out that sitting down and talking with someone once or twice a week is as powerful as Prozac. And I was just sort of like, well, that's actually kind of interesting. So what is it about just sitting down and talking to someone who's empathically and thoughtfully listening, reflecting back some of your thoughts, interpreting those thoughts, helping you build skills, helping you motivate yourself to change behaviors? That must be changing the brain, right? Because we know that medications change the brain. So that led me on a journey of trying to understand that connection. And now fast forward, 20 years, and there's scores of studies that show that when we are doing what you and I are doing right now, Donna. We're talking to each other, we're mentalizing, we're trying to understand what you're saying, we're trying to anticipate what you're saying, that our brains literally go into a kind of synchrony, right? And we're having a shared experience. And that shared experience, which is, very similar to, a parent and a child bond, or an intimate couple or loved one, or even just good friends, turns out to feel really good and have therapeutic benefits. So this is why, I really bang on the drum of, not social distancing, but physical distancing, that social connection in and of itself has a very, very powerful healing force. Now, you asked a little bit about, well, there's a crisis before COVID, what was going on there? And so the thesis of the book is that this technology in my hand, right, the smartphones that we all have, as wonderful as they are, and we all have one and we all think they're great, also has been disrupting a fair amount of our social connections, real authentic social connections, right? So texting and social media connections are very different than the kind of conversation even we're having here, let alone intimate connections that people have. So we could talk more about that if you like.
Well, we're here, but before we're here, I just wanted to say, because everyone likes to, they're contributing as well, but Erin just talked about that she struggled through this time. And I find when I'm honest about it, people acknowledge how difficult it's been for them as well. And just knowing you're not alone, right? Just knowing you're not alone is a really helpful thing.
No, and this is the point about destigmatizing. It normalizes it. Like, look, it sucks. No one's enjoying going through this, and I think we should just be sort of honest about that, right? This is hard, and once you just sort of say that, you're like, oh, it sucks for you too. Yeah, it's difficult for you too. It's like, yeah, it is. Let's talk about that, and then you kind of get through it, and then you sort of move to like, okay, well, can I help you, or can you help me, and how do we do this together?
Right, absolutely. Okay, everybody, we're here at Refresh. We're talking to the amazing, wonderful Dr. Carl Marci, who is supplying us with an abundance of knowledge and insight about the beautiful organ of the brain, but how it gets us to think. You did talk about empathy, but what about racism and dehumanization? What role does the brain play in that?
Yeah, so I'm fortunate to chair a nonprofit organization called Beyond Conflict that is dedicated to using brain and behavioral science to try to understand some really big social issues. One of them is racism, another is dehumanization, and another is political polarization. So, just a quick comment on each one. So,
there's a triumvirate.
Yeah, small topics, right? And it's a great group of people trying to do strong work. But it's the same sort of thing we were talking about, like the soft science of empathy, right? How do we bring our knowledge of the brain to some of these really complicated things, right? So racism, big topic. One area that we're working on with some wonderful folks at NYU is if you look at children up to a certain age, around 4 or 5, and you take white children and you have a mixed race of people offering them toys, they will not discriminate between the color of the skin of someone who's giving them a toy, right? And you could take a black child and the same thing will happen. But something happens, a couple, 3 years later, and preference starts to bias towards people with the same color skin. And what experts have concluded from this is that, we actually learn racism. We're not born with it. We're not born to discriminate based on the color of skin. So could we inoculate children? In other words, could we, through parent guides to help teach, through school curriculum, try to inoculate a generation of children to be less racist by merely educating them on some very simple brain functions and the fact that this is a learned choice? One example. Dehumanization, big topic. One area that we've done some work on is with immigrants coming across the border. In the language, when we refer to other humans as rats or vermin, right? I mean, that's dehumanization, right? You're literally putting them at a different level on the evolutionary scale. So similar with racism, we're looking into ways of how do we sort of take one group of people who dehumanizes another group of people, and can we do an intervention through like a video or some kind of training to see if we can change their attitudes? And one of the things we've learned is that you can do that. You can't do it with information alone. Like you can't just educate people about how they're wrong because people get very defensive. But if you use emotional stories about a mom and a child crossing the border to have a better life, who come to this country, they contribute, they pay taxes, and the kid grows up to, cure cancer. Oh, okay. Well, that's a whole different story, right? So we're looking at ways of creating video interventions to help people understand different things about dehumanization, and how it really can stigmatize a whole population and lead to some very bad political decisions as well.
Right. Which is what we're living through and we've seen over a long period of time.
Yeah, and if I can make a point on the third one, which is
political polarization, yeah.
Political polarization, because we live in a very polarized time. We did this amazing study that we funded with the University of Pennsylvania that looked at Democrats and Republicans' views of the other party. But then we did something interesting, which is to say, okay, not only are we going to ask what you think of the other party, what do you think they think of you? Right. So if I'm a Republican and you're a Democrat, right, I, have my opinion about you as a Democrat, but I think you as a Democrat think of me as a Republican far worse than you actually do. So what we showed is that there's this gap between what we perceive the other to view us and the reality of that. And the reality is we're actually not as far apart as we think we are on a number of issues, including immigration and gun control, which are the two we looked at. Right. So you take these extreme positions like, oh, the Democrats just want to open all borders and let anybody else in. And the Republicans, oh, they just want to put up a wall and keep everybody out. Well, it turns out that's the perception. The reality is much more nuanced, much closer, even at the extremes on really polarizing issues. And so part of what I think, we're trying to do is educate people to say, look, there's a difference between perception and reality. And if we can close that gap and realize that we all are in this together, that might really help. And the reason that's important is because we run the risk of what we have referred to as toxic polarization. And toxic polarization is when party goes above country. Right. And so when you identify with your party, whichever one it is, stronger than you do your country, then you're in trouble as a society, right? Because there isn't that common thing that, we're Americans first and Democrats or Republicans second, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And I think we could probably spend a whole hour on that in and of itself, but it's fascinating. And actually, it's an incredibly optimistic statement. We hear it all the time, right? Perception and reality. But when you really stop and think, hey, listen, the difference between the two are not as broad as we think. That means there's hope. And it means it's about connecting and giving ourselves space to be heard and to listen. That said, I want to just take a little bit of a flip here because I know we want to talk about this, and Carla has been nice enough to actually give us a nice link to it. Her daughter's a mental health counselor, and they discuss often how much worse things are today. But they say the growth of telehealth has helped to reach more people. And I know that you are really involved in a new company called Ready that's all about bringing mental health into our homes. And I'd love if you talk a little bit about what you're doing, what you're learning, and how we can benefit from that.
Sure. Yeah. Let's talk about Ready. Super exciting. This is a venture-backed, technologically enabled, on-demand healthcare company. We essentially have this idea, and our founder, Justin Dangle, had this idea that if you can order a pizza or a product or a car to your home, why can't you order healthcare? Right. And so you can go online in the markets we serve, getready.com. And if we're in your market, you could literally call the phone and we will send what we call a responder, which is a licensed and trained EMT or paramedic or sometimes a nurse. And they will go in your home and they will do an assessment. They'll take your vital signs, ask you some questions, and then we'll use telehealth to bring a licensed clinician in to do a diagnosis and treatment where appropriate. So it's this really nice combination of again, in the home, face-to-face, on demand, but also then leveraging telehealth to see that. So we have eyes and ears in the home. Our responders are from the communities they serve. So they know their neighborhoods and they know the people in them. And then our clinicians, sometimes they're in another state because of waivers and the need and the demand. And it's been, it was an interesting healthcare delivery model prior to COVID. After COVID, it became essential. right? So we were in, when I joined, we were in two cities, in Las Vegas and New Orleans. And now we have expanded to Reno. We're now in LA, New York City, the National Capital Region, and Miami, Florida. So, and we've expanded to all of Southeast Louisiana. So, we're in 8 cities, and we were one of the first companies to get PPE, right? The personal protective equipment to manage COVID. We were one of the first companies to partner and get PCR, the RNA test in the home, so we could go in the home and do these tests. We're now rolling out rapid antigen testing, which I think is really critical, so you can get that fast result. And we're actively working toward being ready, being prepared to deliver the COVID vaccine when it's available, should we be chosen, to people's homes. So we've really tried to play a role in that pandemic. Now, I was hired as a psychiatrist to do mental health. And we've all become infectious disease experts because of the pandemic. But the one of the twin demics is the epidemic in mental health. And so we've also launched our mental health offering in New Orleans, and we'll be expanding to other markets where we have licensed clinical social workers, psychiatrists, soon licensed psychiatric nurse practitioners,
Right.
who can use telehealth, and we can screen patients as they come through our different service lines, and then give them faster access to care.
Which is great. Are you concerned about the amount of available caregivers we have? Like, you said 60% of people have mental health. Are we trained and staffed as a country or as a medical profession to be able to answer the call?
Absolutely not. And yes, I am concerned, right? I mean, there's no question the rate of increase in the need for mental health services is outstripping the increase in our ability to meet that need. That said, telehealth, and the Ready model is one example, makes access easier, right? You can literally just pick up the phone and connect. And so telehealth has really made access better, in particular outside of urban environments, right? So mental health tends to cluster. I have no idea why mental health workers love cities so much, but they tend to cluster in cities. So exurbs and rural areas tend to have poor access. Telehealth solves that, right? Completely breaks down that barrier. The other thing we're doing is trying to leverage team approaches, right? So not everybody needs a psychiatrist that went to a medical school. How do we leverage licensed clinical social workers? How do we train a generation of mental health coaches? How do we use technology to give information, to encourage people and motivate people between visits? These are all the things that that I'm very interested in and working on, so that we can try to close that gap between the rising need and our ability to meet that need. So it's got to be a combination of a team approach with different levels of skills, that's technology enabled, that's highly accessible. So our mission is to bring high quality care where and when people need it, and I think you need those different factors to fulfill that mission.
Well, we can honestly say there's never been a better time and a more needed time, right? Again, another silver lining in COVID that opens up a a gap, which becomes an opportunity, which hopefully will result in some goodness. So now you're the psychiatrist to all today. So we have two questions for you, Dr. Marci. A lot of us are incredibly concerned about our kids, obviously,
Yeah.
of all different ages. I know you're a dad of 3 young children. What are the warning signs that a child might need help?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I think we have to think developmentally, right? So what age are we talking about, right? So I think when you're talking about sort of the toddler years, early school years, kids aren't as articulate and verbal as older children are. So there, you're really looking for behavioral changes, right? Are they not eating as much? Are they making less eye contact? Are they less enthusiastic about things that they used to be? Those are the kind of warning signs that I would be concerned about. As you move up in age, kids might act out more. So are they more irritable? Are they getting into fights with their, in my case, brother and sister more? Are they being more sort of rude and impolite to you as a parent when they wouldn't before? So that kind of short-temperedness, frustration tolerance decreasing, irritability. The kids don't, walk up to mom and dad and say, Dad, I'm depressed, right? They tend to
Right.
be more irritable and whatnot. Get into the teen years, then it's it gets more complex. They can act in more, so you want to be mindful of changes and patterns around maybe substance abuse, the use of media and social media in particular. Are they hiding in their room more, on their phone more? Any change in patterns of those types of things would be red flags for sure for me.
Right. Okay. And then Dr. Marci, for all of us, listen, we're all coping. You can see it in the comments. It's great that people can acknowledge that they are stressed, but that we're in this together. So for all of us who are looking how we can cope, what are 3 things? And I think we have a graphic that we can do, all do every day to help ourselves. And I think these are some of the things that you can make them more than 3, because everyone will take whatever you have to heart for sure.
Yeah, so this is great. So we talked about this a little bit the other day. I think before we get to this list, the first one is self-care, right? So we talked a little bit about the importance of exercise. We talked about the importance of eating right. I like to use the example. When we used to get on airplanes, what do they say? Put the oxygen on you first, and then the person next to you. So if we're not able to take care of ourselves, it's very hard for us to really and truly take care of others. So being mindful about exercise, diet, there's all kinds of great meditation apps out there. We now know that meditation changes the brain, and it does so in healthy ways. So I encourage people to look into meditation apps. And again, like I said, socialization is really important. So connecting with other people can be very powerfully a very powerful antidepressant. So I think self-care is really important. The influence where you can have influence. Sort of reminded of the serenity prayer, right? Lord, give me the strength to change the things I can change, the serenity to accept the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? I mean, I think we really need to all think about that a little bit and try to have influence where you can. If that's being, focusing on work, if you're fortunate enough to have work, if it's, being a better parent, being a better friend, talking to people you haven't talked to a long time. These are things that we can control in our lives, and having a little bit of a control in a period of uncertainty can go a long way. Take it by day, I think is really this idea that in a world of uncertainty, focus on the short term, right? This is like one thing at a time. How do we sort of think about what do we do this week? It's very hard to plan for next month right now, let alone six months from now, because we don't know what's going to happen, right? We don't know how fast this vaccine is going to come. We don't know what's going to go. So really trying to take it day by day and live in the moment a little bit is important. And then the third one is, sort of meaning and purpose. How do we find meaning in our lives? I'm very fortunate to be involved in this terrific company that is playing an active role in the pandemic, and being able to integrate, physical health, mental health, and social health for patients when and where they need it. That's really been a gift for me. But we can all do some part, whether it's sending a can of food to the local food bank, or, trying to volunteer, particularly this week of Thanksgiving, for someone safely, with a mask and following all the rules, having compassion for ourselves and others, having a little grace. I just think, we all need a little grace right now. And this is just sort of my thoughts for how to move forward in this uncertain times.
We hear them, we receive them, we appreciate them, we're thankful for them, and we're thankful to you. We're thankful to Kelly and Emmy for bringing us together. I have a page full of notes here, and I usually like to end up by just, that's why when I look down, everybody knows I'm just taking notes. So many of them. One, I think we all love this. We're not social distancing, we're physical distancing. Right? And that the idea to keep the idea of social connection foremost in our brains is really important, because social connection is a very, very powerful force. Big events create big change, but small events create smaller change, but change is good. And so we should get out there and walk. If that's our first step into creating some more physical activity in our life, good for our brains, we should be doing that. And I definitely take a degree of great optimism from your comments about understanding that the difference between perception and reality is much smaller than we think. Therefore, there is a chance for us to close the gap. And I think in some ways that also relieves a lot of stress and brings us together as a community in a much more connected way. So thank you for that, Dr. Carl. I know in this time of gratitude, we've spoken about our WOW girls. We work very hard in our work to actually create socially safe spaces for them. They're appropriately named because of who they are and the trails they want to blaze, and it's a privilege to walk with them. As you know, today is Giving Tuesday, and so we wanted to share with you Olivia's note of thanks to all of us, because it is Giving Tuesday and it's a time to give thanks. So Sherry, if you would share Olivia, a Generation WOW girl's thoughts with us now.
Buddy, I'm Olivia and I'm a member of Generation WOW. I love WOW because I've always had a hard time making new friends, and being a part of this program has made me more confident about opening up to new people. WOW supports me by being a safe, secure environment where I can express myself with no judgment. WOW teaches me to be a confident, independent, and emotionally healthy young woman. Thank you to Generation WOW and all who support the program and make such a difference to girls like me.
We love Olivia. Maria Denson, who works closely with her, just sent me a note. We love Olivia. So I'm Giving Tuesday's a week from now, so we're all getting ready. You know how any holiday is. It's like it's a Giving Tuesday, but we started like the week before. We're fortunate, Generation W, to have a matching grant for all gifts. So if anyone's inclined to support our WOW girls, you will enrich the work and make a difference in their lives, and we say thank you. Next week, you know me, I'm the athlete. I love teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work. And when it comes to advancing women in the workplace, we know we can't do it alone. Actually, we don't want to do it alone. We want a team. We want a diverse, differentiated, interesting, committed team to help us along. Why? Because if it's better for us, it's better for everyone. And so Doctors Brad Johnson and Dr. David Smith believe that men have a crucial opportunity to promote gender equality at work. And next week, they will share their learning as they wrote a book, Good Guys, How Men Can Be Better Allies for Women in the Workplace, how men can partner with their female colleagues to advance women's leadership and equality by breaking ingrained gender stereotypes, overcoming unconscious bias, and creating strong working relationships. Who doesn't want that? So you know what? Grab a good guy next week and bring them along. Dr. Carl, I'm bringing you back. You're going to be my good guy for this next session. Until then, let me wish everybody a very happy and healthy Thanksgiving. Jacob Orender, I'm so glad you joined us all the way from the Middle East. I love you and miss you so much. I'm grateful to our team, our Generation W team, Sherry and Jamie, our producers. Tara, thanks for kicking in today. You did a great job. Stacy, Kasha, Ruth, Mariah, and Christina. Everyone, this is it. It's really time for Thanksgiving. Enjoy the family you have. Remember to create those social connections, and blessings on you all. Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Carl. You're fantastic.
My pleasure. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.